What is the political foundation of Trumpism? Is it conservatism? Is it authoritarianism? We are going to explore that. And also the question of what is going to be the legacy and future of Trumpism. When Trump is gone, and at some point he will be, is it going to be J.D. Vance doing Trumpism? Is it going to be J.D. Vance doing Peter Thiel style technocracy? We are going to be speaking about these questions with writer and political theorist Laura Field. We talk about so many of these things, the influence of the Catholic Church on current Trumpism and more. Her new book is Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. Let's get to that conversation. So Laura, I've always thought of the Republican Party, at least pre-Trump, as kind of broken into a few groups, the kind of pro-business Republicans, kind of like the Romney types. The religious conservatives whose focus is more social issues and religion, and then kind of like the libertarian right, which sometimes can seem sort of centrist or left on social issues, but at the end of the day, they are still part of the right wing. In the MAGA era where we have Trumpism, do you think that analysis of the Republican Party still makes sense? Is there an additional component, or has it sort of rewritten these alliances?
Well, thank you. I think that model, sort of those cohorts or contingents are still there in some respects, right? But there's been a big crack up and sort of a whole overhaul of the Republican Party and the main actors in the party. And so my book chronicles this transformation. I'm focused mainly on the kind of intellectual part of the movement. And so thinking of like Buckley and the National Review, and the people who were thought of previously as the old establishment, they've basically been replaced over the course of the last decade or so. And so my book tracks that, tries to explain how it happened, chronicles the key people involved and the key moments. So yes, all of the different pieces of the puzzle are still there, but there are new pieces that you didn't mention that kind of have really come to the foreground.
Tell us about those new pieces.
Sure thing. Yeah. So I think a useful way to think about this is to think about the old fusionist coalition under Reagan and sort of thought through by people like William Buckley and Frank Meyer. And that model was a liberal economics, right? Or small fiscal conservatism, free trade, social conservatism, and liberal internationalism or anti-communism, right? So that's the trifecta. It was called the Gipper's stool with Reagan. And that model has really just been not completely, but mostly transformed. And so in 2016, one of the people I write about, named Michael Anton, described Trumpism as economic nationalism, right? Which is very different from fiscal conservatism. Social conservatism was still very much in the mix, though it wasn't part of his definition. So his definition was economic nationalism, secure borders, and America first foreign policy. And so those last two things are very different from the Reagan vision. And those threads of conservatism had been part of the movement for a long time, often associated with what is called the old right or with paleoconservatism. And Trump really represented a lot of that. And that was one of the things I was surprised about in writing the book, just how the people who sort of were at the vanguard of defending Trump from an intellectual perspective were really drawing on these very prominent threads of paleoconservative thought, which had always been in contention and sort of vying for power within the conservative intellectual movement more broadly.
Has there been a change in your mind to, if we just imagine the right, like on a ruler, right, like a political spectrum, has there been a change to where on the spectrum the kind of tone and agenda setting was coming from, in the sense of Buckley maybe was agenda setting, but from closer to the center, where now maybe the agenda setting is happening further to the extreme, or is that not a change that has taken place?
No, I think that's a fair way to describe the change. I mean, you can think about one shorthand people use to describe the MAGA New Right, which is my name for this sort of intellectual networked cluster of people, is to say that they've moved left on economics and right on social issues. And that's kind of useful as a really quick shorthand. but it's not, but these spectrums we use get very complicated and kind of messy. So I think left on economics doesn't quite capture the extent to which they really have moved to the right more generally. And there's all kinds of sort of extremism packed in.
When it comes to the people most influential in, I guess, where Trump is today, to some degree, Trump's second term is a little bit different than Trump's first term. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit. But who are the players or influences that you think have the most control over where Trump's agenda is in his second term?
So that's a very useful question. And I think, let me just say, I mean, some of the sort of tangible ways in which I think these ideas people matter, because I think it's kind of easy to think, well, Trump is not exactly sitting there reading white papers, right, about the future of the GOP. And I think that's a true instinct that we have in response to this stuff. But and as I sort of track in the book, there was this intellectual movement that kind of came in to fill this vacuum, and they've been really, really successful. And so during the course of the first Trump administration, they were kind of coming together in their own private ways and organizing conferences. And I basically named 3 different groups, which we can get into maybe in a second. But there's the Claremont Institute people, Michael Anton, who I just mentioned, the National Conservatives, who are sort of the umbrella organizing group, and then the post-liberal group, which is mainly sort of Catholic conservatives. And so they all came together in the first administration, and they helped orchestrate January 6th in some important ways, and wrote the legal memos for Pence, all of that. So they were crucial. They had an impact in the first administration, but surprisingly, after January 6th and after Biden won and was inaugurated, I sort of thought the movement would die out, right? That these people would sort of realize, oh, that didn't go very well. But that's not what happened. They started to gradually take over these important institutions like the Heritage Foundation, Intercollegiate Studies Association. There was a huge proliferation of new social media, new journals, new legal, Stephen Miller started a legal group. So there was a lot going on. They started trying out their policies in the red states, like in Florida. And then they wrote up Project 2025, right? Sort of, I mean, not immediately. All these people I write about weren't directly involved in that, but they were part of that sort of engine that new direction. And I'll finish up, but they also got J.D. Vance. Basically, these are the guys behind J.D. Vance. He's friends with most of the people I write about and has been impacted by them. And then, of course, they won the election. And finally, they also just have had this really major impact in the cultural sort of milieu of conservatism with young staffers on Capitol Hill. You can hear now there are these people saying that 30 to 40% of the people in Washington are groypers, which is the very far right Nick Fuentes crowd. I'm skeptical about that, but you can see this sort of massive cultural transformation in the GOP, especially with young people.
I'm curious what you make about this divide over the H-1B visa, because it's been very interesting to watch how people like Elon Musk during I guess we would call it the breakup that ultimately took place with Donald Trump, although maybe not, because then they were buddy-buddy at Charlie Kirk's funeral. But during the public breakup that took place, there was this disagreement over, do we need to be America first in terms of who gets the jobs, or do we need to be bringing in smart engineers from other countries in order to make American companies do well? And there's been kind of a disagreement. Vivek Ramaswamy has been part of that disagreement. What do you make of that? And is that a predictable disagreement based on how this movement has sort of coalesced?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, what's happening now, and you give a good example of this, is they're in power. They're doing a lot of big things. And with that responsibility comes sort of the divisions become more obvious. And so, yeah, I think that was predictable. There's basically unity on the new right about immigration in terms of it's generally bad and has been pursued in a bad way since the 60s, because they're some of it's just raw racism, and otherwise they justify it based on sort of cultural mores and that we should be privileging either people from Europe, right, or people, as you say, with these kind of special expertise, which is less controversial. So there are sort of different factions will argue different points on this. Some of them there are some who are open to Catholic immigration in a way that they're more closed to other forms of immigration. So yeah, I think it was predictable. I was personally quite surprised by Elon Musk's just like outsized role in the early part of this administration. That was frankly just like, they keep surprising me. And that was one of the big things.
When it comes to using fear of societal change, is the new right, I don't know if better is the right word, because it's sort of like, if you think it's a bad thing, are they better? Are they more skilled or more effective at using fear of social change, which could include where immigrants are coming from, but it encompasses other areas as well? Are they more effective or less effective than prior Republicans?
Well, it's a touchy question. So the way, like, as you sort of noted in your framing of it, I think they're way better at it, which also makes them way worse.
Right.
But I think one thing that we have to be careful about here is that Trump was able to articulate some real grievances that did matter to people, obviously, in a way that I think establishment conservatives weren't able to tap into, or maybe even see, and certainly Democrats weren't and aren't able to see. And I don't mean to be excessively vague here. I think I'm not just talking about immigration and the controversies around immigration. I mean, Democrats and they've been trying to solve that for a long time. And I mean, so I don't mean to get partisan. I think that the Republicans are guiltier on that front for not moving forward with legislation. But I'm also talking about economic issues, right? The economic crisis, the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, Donald Trump was very vocal about that. And the people I write about are very clear that, his willingness to just say things that are completely disavowed or were in the Republican establishment really did him a good service, because there was a kind of authenticity there, which, I despise Donald Trump personally, find it really still bewildering that he is the president of this country. But those things do matter to people, right? And the establishment on both sides is not very good at confronting that.
What do you make of the divide among the right over the Epstein files, in the sense of the people that now, even with the emails that came out last week, go, oh, these are doctored, or like, who would believe Jeffrey Epstein anyway? I don't really care what it says. Is that coming out of a personal loyalty to Trump? Is it coming out of something else? Are you surprised by the divide?
I'm not that surprised, because it seems like in the lead up to the 2024 election, many Republicans were using the Epstein files as an argument in their own favor. And they were saying, we're going to release them. They were fueling the conspiracy theories, which maybe weren't conspiracy theories, about who's in those files. And so I think that the public, there are a lot of conspiracies on the right about Democrats being pedophiles, right? And just these like really awful networks of traffickers. Like, there's a lot of that. And for good reason. I mean, even if those things are false, you can see how people would care about it, because anyone who has children cares about this stuff. It's really disgusting. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised. And I think it's also just like the fish rots from the top. I mean, this stuff is unbelievable and explosive. And I think it's going to be a real problem for the Republicans. And maybe some Democrats. Who knows who's in those files, right?
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. It is interesting how the people on the left that I talk to, they go, yeah, there may well be Democrats. We don't care. We just want to see everything. And it seems like there is less of a concern that their people would be in the files. Like, I saw a lot of commentary over the weekend, like, listen, if this takes down Bill Clinton because he was more involved than we currently knew, and it also exposes Trump, like, who cares? We just want to know what happened.
No kidding. Yeah. No, I agree. Like, I spend too much time watching the right, so I don't have a real sense of how people think on the left, except for, many of my friends and I'm a liberal, right? But it's like, so I'm just like, yeah, who cares? I mean, get rid of them. Vote, like, these guys can go down. All of them, like, bring it on, right? Yeah. But I don't know. I think that it's just very touchy, because for the right now, that means losing the power they currently hold, and it completely explodes. They've gone all in on Trump. Someone like J.D. Vance has gone all in on this guy. I don't think he can backpedal now. So I think it's this huge, massive problem for them. And, Democrats should be exploiting the heck out of that.
Let's talk a little bit about J.D. Vance, because I did want to kind of talk about the succession planning, so to speak, for the current right. There's the idea of Vance as the heir apparent to Trump, but there's two versions of that, I guess you would say. One is Vance would actually continue Trumpism as we know it today. The other angle is. No, Vance would actually be doing the Peter Thiel inspired sort of technocratic right that has maybe helped Vance become a senator in the first place with Thiel support, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera. Do you have any
Mm-hmm.
opinion, insights, or thoughts as to what is likely to be the succession planning here?
Yeah, I think that that's a useful way of sort of distinguishing the two paths. And I think he would try to distance himself from Trump the moment Trump's out of power, and try to present himself as this new possibility. And you're right, it would be sort of Teal inflected right wing technocracy.
Hmm.
I think that, and there are kind of tensions, as we saw with Doge versus MAGA. There are these tensions and rifts in the movement. And so I think, for one thing, I think that that's not going to necessarily be popular enough with some of the people who were opposed to the tariffs. I don't know that he'll get away with backpedaling like that. But it's all very hard to say. I think the one thing that gives me pause is he's in terms of the groups that I write about that I listed before, he's sort of in with all of them, and they span the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
And so there's this, and I think that even if technocratic, right-wing industrial policy, right, or reindustrialization, or sort of a social conservative program for some sort of social democracy, left economics, which I think is kind of what we're talking about with Vance. Even if that's all true, it's also layered in with a very radical effort to basically use what's left of the American federal regime to impose a Catholic social order. I mean, not maybe in J.D. Vance's case, but a lot of the people I write about who he's closest to do take that view. They have a very radical agenda. I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but they are quite explicit that they would like to use the state to reorder American society towards the common good and the highest good, which is Catholic salvation in their view. So it's very, he's sort of bound up with that, and has called himself a post-liberal. I'm not sure he believes in all of the things I just mentioned, but that's sort of an explicit part of what they're up to.
We've been speaking with Laura Field, writer and political theorist. Her new book is Furious Minds: The Making of the New MAGA Right. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.